It's time to bring you yet another amazing episode. And now, welcome your host.
Hello, this is Omobola Stephen, the also fly well lived by Omobola Stephen. On Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen, we like to explore topics and subjects covering personal development and self-improvement. We've come to realize the importance of embracing personal development and self-improvement along the course of our lives, because when we do so, we get to find ourselves along the path. And in finding ourselves, we realize that so much innate potentials within us, and also a lot of bounties that life is willing to offer us. Now, personal development and self-improvement is not going to happen overnight. The reward doesn't happen overnight. It's something we have to continually work upon, improve upon, in order to see our life transform from where it is to where it needs to be. Now, it's going to be a transformational journey indeed. This is the focus and the mission of Life Well Lived by Omobola Stephen. We focus on constructive, yet destructive and disruptive kind of conversation, mind shift, that's going to pivot the changes you and I need in this side of eternity. Today, I have James Chitwood, Dr. James Chitwood, I beg your pardon, who is on the show with me, is an author, and he will be talking about growth in life and also in the workplace. He has a new book he likes to explore with the audience. Talking about leadership is not enough. So I have Dr. James Chitwood on the show with me. Thank you for joining me on the show, Doctor.
Thank you. Thank you, Omobola. Pleased to be here.
Pleased to have you on the show once again. Thanks for joining me on the show. So what does it really mean to grow in life?
Growing in life should be something that we all pursue on a daily basis. I'm always amazed by the person who says, well, this is just the way that I am, or this is just the way that I think. And I'm always taken aback thinking, well, actually, that's not true. You can change. Yes, there are innate behaviors, yet everything else we can develop and grow, and we should always be doing that. I'm a product of a pretty challenging childhood. Some of the things that I experienced, many people would find a hard time even just continuing to go forward. And I decided a long time ago that I was not going to let my past dictate my future, and I was going to just continue to drive forward. And I pretty much stumbled through life doing the best that I could. I pursued a doctorate just because it was hard. I never planned to write a book, didn't want to be a consultant. It wasn't my life goal. There were many people in my classes that was their life goal. It wasn't mine. I just wanted to do it just to do it. But God, the universe kept pushing me, and so I ended up here. My objective has always been to give back. I always wanted to make the world a better place in whatever way I could. And so this book and my current consulting work is just my best way that I know how to give to the world and hopefully receive while I'm at it.
Right. Now, you like to share some of the incredible insights that you have put in your book, talking about leadership is not enough to my audience. So you talk about the TRAC method. I'm talking about TRAC, TRAC model. So what is it all about?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So the TRAC model are the fundamental elements that are important to produce the right environment. The insight to it came from my time in the military, my time in many startup organizations, but it was at a moment where I was doing a turnaround operation. I was brought in to turn around an organization, and I was part of a team, and I had a giant whiteboard with 5 columns of tasks that we needed to perform to really turn this operation around. And I realized in looking at it that I had everything categorized in 4 columns and then miscellaneous stuff. And those 4 columns were training, recognition, accountability, and communication. So those are the 4 elements of my model: training, recognition, accountability, and communication. And I use the word elements, not pillars. Many people, when they talk about their model and they talk about culture, they say, well, these are the pillars, because pillars are strong. The problem I have with the word pillars is they're also independent. They don't touch. You don't want your pillars to touch. You've got another problem, right? Whereas elements come together to make something stronger. And when we're dealing with humans, we're dealing with a beautifully complex organization or organism, and no one thing will ever work. It's always a combination of elements that come together. So To put this in perspective, accountability is very important. Every employee must know what they're held accountable to, right? An employee should never walk into an annual review without already knowing the outcome. Why? Because they had conversations repeatedly for the past 52 weeks covering how they were doing, right? So complete transparency in this area. And when they're not performing, well, then we need to bring in training to help them achieve their goals. And if they are achieving their goals and they're doing it at an exceptional level, well, then maybe they can train someone else. And that's where accountability, training, and recognition come together, because now we have an employee who's helping develop another employee. And that'll do a couple things. One, it rewards the one employee by saying, hey, I am good at this. Let me give to other employees. And they then gain by giving. We all gain when we give. This is a fundamental truth in life. Also, it creates stronger social bonds between these two employees, because now you have one employee training another. And social bonds are the hallmark of a positive culture in an organization. And then communication is that element that runs through everything. You need to have an open communication in an organization, or you'll never produce a positive performance environment. I always say the two quickest ways to motivate or demotivate employees. Well, one of them is very short term, and that's pay. You want to upset your employees, mess with their pay. I do not consider pay a motivator, but it sure as heck is a demotivator. You can give them a quick little burst of motivation by throwing money at them, but it doesn't last, not for long. We're not motivated by money as a general rule. But communication is that one thing that will really demotivate your employees. And it'll motivate them if they believe that they are part of the communication flow of the organization. If they believe they're being listened to and that the feedback they give is acted upon, then they believe they're part of the organization as a greater, deeper level. And that is critical to employee engagement. So these elements all work together. You can't take one or another. I'm often asked, Jim, what is the one thing I can do? And I say there isn't a one. You have to look at the complexity of the human being and recognize that everything you do matters. And yet, if there's one thing you want to focus on first, it's opening up the lines of communication in your organization. Do that while you are developing everything else.
Dr. James, I like us to go back to talking about the employee accountability. You just mentioned that earlier. We also talk about the leaders being accountable in the workplace. Don't you think so?
I'm sorry, don't I think what about the leaders?
Yes, you talked about the employee being accountable in the workplace. Now, I also like us to, the question I'm asking you right now is, how about the leaders? Don't you think the leaders also needs to be held accountable, or are they too big to do that?
Well, everybody's accountable. Everybody has goals. And I believe that the leader's only job is to develop their employees. That's their sole purpose to be there. It's not to dictate and to manage. It's to help their employees develop. And so, yes, absolutely, leaders are not only accountable for what they do and what they do say, they're also accountable for what they don't do and what they don't say. And that is something that most leaders fail to recognize, that when they're not lifting up their employees, when they're not giving positive words, when they're not helping employees improve, they're accountable for that. And that becomes a problem, right? And so leaders are, look, leadership is hard. And I think one of the failures of most companies, going back to training, is that they don't train people to be a manager. Right? Someone's good at a job and they just promote them into a new management role. It doesn't mean they have a single bit of an idea how to manage an employee. And so I really believe that we need to train people to be managers within an organization, because every org is different. And not every organization is what most of us would call a positive environment. And yet those organizations, people come to them every day and they succeed in them to the degree that they're able in those orgs. And so it's important to teach managers how to manage that way. For other organizations, it's going to be different. And so how does that organization expect its managers to treat its employees in their one-on-one communications, in their team building, or in their team meetings as well? How do they expect them to communicate? How do they expect them to hold their people accountable, right? And so that is a critical element to employee development is manager development. And then director development. Directing managers is different than managing employees. And so how is that done? What is it like to be a VP, right? And so you need to build in these trainings, and by so doing, you can help your managers understand what they are truly accountable in those positions.
All right, Doctor, at least something would have inspired you to write the book Leadership is Not Enough. Now, my question really to you is, do you think that there are too many leaders and not enough leadership?
I think that we as a nation have lost sight of the role of the leader. So two things happened around the middle of the 60s, 1960s to the late 80s. And that is, two things occurred simultaneously. Number one, employees started being seen as liabilities, and organizations were seeking the cheapest, inexpensive labor they could possibly get, and they offshored a lot of jobs. And now we as a country have realized that, well, actually wasn't a very good idea. So employees were treated as liabilities on the balance sheet, and they started getting offshore to find the cheapest labor possible. They were no longer seen as valuable assets of the organization. Around that same time, we saw leadership get vaulted to this position of almost godlike status, where we pay our leaders at an exponential rate above what we pay employees, and we just expect it to be the norm, and it's really not. And so what's happened now is we have CEOs who are making 10,000 times what their employees are making, and that's just absurd. If you go back to the 60s, it was a 60-to-1 ratio. If you go back to the 40s, it was a 50-to-1 ratio. So for a good 100 years in this country, when we were our strongest, when we were an industrial powerhouse, CEOs did not make what they make today. They were seen more as a member of the team than this godlike status that we call them now. I'm currently working on an article. I'm titling it, "Is Capitalism at Risk?" Because I believe that we as a country have lost sight of the true foundings of, as written by Adam Smith. So The Wealth of Nations is written by Adam Smith. It's considered one of the foundational tomes in capitalism. And everybody looks at it and they talk about free market economy, right? The Wealth of Nations is built upon a free market. That's actually an outcome. The cause is voluntary participation of labor, and labor is seen as an asset and an equal participant in the production of goods for an organization, right? And so it wasn't about all these great leaders. They weren't the focus of the organization. The focus of the organization was the output, and that output was created by the labor force. And so the symbiotic relationship existed, and somewhere along the way, we started looking at employees differently, and we started looking at leadership differently. And I think that's become our fundamental problem in this country, is we're creating godlike leaders, and we're losing sight of where the value of the organization truly resides, and that's in the voluntary participation of labor. Does that answer that question?
Oh, really? But how do you think we can begin to right the wrong?
Well, I think we could start with the compensation model. I mean, there's this very old saying in economics that the stock market is not the economy. Same thing is true for a company. The stock price of a company has nothing to do with the health of the organization. It's purely based upon perspective. It's not based upon the value of the organization. So how to fix this? Oh, goodness, I really wish I had a better idea, but it kind of has to happen one company at a time. And we, as consumers of stock, we need to stop this insanity of paying these CEOs. Look, here's the problem. Stock price is short term. So we are incentivizing the leaders of our organization off of a short-term gain. You can make a stock market look great, a stock price look great, and it has nothing to do with the long-term health of the company. Your average CEO's got a 5-year life cycle, and it goes down from there. So every company basically has got 5-year life cycle, the CEO, until somebody else comes in. Well, I think most of us want our companies to last longer than 5 years. And so there creates the disconnect.
Thank you, Dr. James, for that insight with my audience. So, we wanted to talk, we were talking about growth, but really still talking about growth, and we like to move towards growth in employee growth. So how can organizations encourage growth in their employees, in the organizations in general?
Yeah, actually, I think organizations, it's a combined mistake in the area of growth. So what I mean by that, Omobola, is that right now, for most employees, all right, look, growth has many meanings, right? We could just find that a million ways. But I think at the fundamental level, it has to do with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And at the baseline level of that hierarchy, we're talking about physical and psychological safety. So we don't have to talk about psychological. That's another conversation. Physical safety has to do with a roof over our head and food upon our table. Now, we all know that it also takes, it's braces for our kids, it's soccer lessons, it's maybe a vacation, right? It's all of these things that help us stay alive and keep going in our society. The challenge for most employees is this. Every year, milk is going to become more expensive. Costs are going to become more expensive, right? And if there's not a clear pathway to make more money, what most of us would call growing by getting a new advanced position, then that employee will be losing money. If their raise is 3.5% and the cost of living went up 4.2, well, now they're losing money. Even though they got a raise, they're losing money. And psychologically, we all know this, right? And so right now, people talk about growth and they often talk about career advancement. Well, there's many people who don't want to become a manager. Management is hard. Yet for most people, the only way to get a big bump in pay is either A, leave their company and go somewhere else, or B, be promoted. And so when I look at growth, I look at it as a dual pathway. One pathway is for the employee that wants to grow into management. They want to become a manager, a director, a VP, a C-suite employee. They want to climb the career ladder. That is growth for them. There are a lot of other employees that's not the case. They don't want to become management because I'll tell you, management's hard. They're not interested in climbing a career ladder, especially this new generation. They're really interested in a balanced life and finding more fulfillment, right? And so how does an organization develop a path for an employee where they can make more money, where they can grow as an individual, and yet never receive a promotion? And so how does a company pull that off? I'm working with the company right now on this very thing. And it takes a lot of work, because here's the thing. We can all think about, okay, well, how do we give our employees the development they need to grow into management, director, VP, C-suite, right? Like, how do we develop? And that's something we all understand. It's really quick. We've all been there. We've all done it. We can easily sit down around a table and map that out. You say, okay, now how do we give a person the ability to grow and never receive a promotion? And that's a much harder conversation to have. And it takes a lot of work, but it can be done. And when it is done, then your employees know that this company cares about my development and my growth, even if I have zero desire to become a manager.
All right, now moving from growth, we like to talk about employee performance at workplace. So really, what do you think can encourage that in the workplace? Or is there any way one can influence it?
Well, so in my dissertation, I studied leadership's role on job satisfaction and employee performance. And my research, so my doctorate is in organizational leadership. My research showed me two things. One of them I felt was obvious, and the other one really took me aback. So the obvious one was that leadership had a statistically relevant role in the job satisfaction of employees. The one that took me back was that leadership was not statistically relevant to the performance of the teams. Now, that took me back because I considered myself a great leader, all full of hubris. It had to be about me. I was studying leadership. It was going to show that the leader played a role. Statistically, that's not the case. And that made me do a lot of research in this area. And what I found out was that there is time and time again studies that show that it's actually the environment, what many of us call the culture, that drives employee performance. It's that team environment that really helps drive performance. There's this old saying, employees quit bosses and stay for teams. That's an old saying in leadership, right? And so the social structure of the organization has a greater ability to drive performance up or down than who your individual leader is. And so how do you do that? Well, you've got to create the right structure to where you are incentivizing individual and team performance, where you are incentivizing cooperation, where you are incentivizing team members to encourage each other and lift each other up. So you need to find ways to create a stronger social bond and a stronger social performance environment.
Dr. James, do you have any exciting news or any projects in the pipeline you think it's going to add value to the audience of the show? You can do so at this time.
Well, my book is really, it's an operator's manual. You do not have to hire me to understand what I'm talking about. Many consultants will write a great book, but you really need to work with them in order to understand how to implement what they're doing. Your audience doesn't have to do that. They can go buy my book. It is an operator's manual to a performance culture. So really my work right now is this. I want to get this message out. I'm doing my best to bring the message forward and give to the world as best as I'm able. So your audience can go to leadershipis.not enough.com. They can go to drjameschitwood.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I have basically broken my book apart, and I am posting on it regularly to give the information as best I can in order to share. And that's just what I'm trying to do right now.
Absolutely. Wish you best of luck in your project, Doctor. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on today's show. Talking about growth, both in life and also in the workplace, and also focusing on your book, Leadership is Not Enough. Thank you for sharing your insight to my audience. Really had a great time listening to your expertise in this regard. I wish you best of luck once again in all the projects and the subsequent ones, Dr. James Chitwood. Now, if you'd like to catch up with any missed episodes of the show, you can do so on any cross-promotion platforms or any podcast distribution platforms online. You can just search for Live Well Lived by Omobola Stephen, and do have a great time listening to expert and professionals share their thoughts and insights on topics and subjects that are related to personal development and self-improvement. I always need you to stay safe. I talk to you soon. Thank you once again, Dr. James.
Thank you, Omobola. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review.